wonderful Sunday. My name is Catalin Dima. I'm a Romanian pianist currently living in Texas, but very close to the border with Oklahoma, where I teach at Southeastern Oklahoma State University. Uh, on the way here, I had the surprise to find out about the beauties of Arkansas. It's the second time I passed through this wonderful state, and I have to say it's a gem. I'm delighted to be here. I know it's a Sunday. I know usually people take off their Sundays, and I appreciate everyone coming to watch and listen to a hopefully wonderful concert. I just wanted to introduce briefly the program, and I assume you probably already have in your hands a flyer with more information. I just mentioned I'm a Romanian pianist, so I am born, raised in Romania, moved in the United States about 12, 13 years ago. I lost track already. But I'm trying to mix both my heritage and the Western music that I love so much and that drawn me to music, classical music altogether. So the program is divided into parts. The first one, I want to think of it more of an introspective part with reflective music, where sometimes you could probably hear some mysterious or better phrased mystic sounds. As you probably can tell if you look at the composers I chose, they're all within that period of time that transitions from late 19th century into beginning of 20th century. It was a wonderful and very experimental time to be a musician, and this way I can probably start with the first piece describing what Franz Liszt uh, thought about the elegy that I'm going to perform. He was a very is not a good word. It's an amazing pianist, but also a very powerful composer. And he loved to experiment with new music. Back then, new music meant losing the key signature or mm, altogether forgetting the stereotypes of classical music and trying something completely new. And this elegy is, as the title suggests, a reflective moment in his life, later life, where he experienced already a lot of sadness, and that is probably caused to the fact that he lost two of his three children, and he had a tumultuous life, which I'm not going into right now. It would take forever, but that meant, in a way, that this music was a continuous search. So you will hear that probably in the beginning of the elegy, a search of key, a search of uh, oneself, if I could put it simply. And towards the end, I like to think that he found it. So that's the first piece, Franz Liszt Elegy. Uh, After that, I'm jumping into a different style, which is known to us musicians as the Impressionist style. Maurice Ravel, that's one of the main composers of the Impressionist style. And it's one of my favorites, not only because he's an amazing innovator and he finds ways of surprising you with different harmonies, different colors, but he also includes some narratives that makes music even more powerful. And this piece is called Ondine. It's part of a suite with the title Gaspard de la Nuit. Ondine itself is the first piece, and it represents the story of a little mermaid uh, who tries to lure a human into her kingdom, offering him everything he ever wished for. But in a surprising turn of events, he rejects her, saying that he's already in love with a mortal. At which her reaction was bursting out in a laugh. And this is the short story, but you will hear how this music follows quite well the narrative and suggests the symbols of sensuality or um, uh, water effects, and as well as a very abrupt changes of mood. And then there is one more that I particularly love, which is the idea of grotesque, which I don't think was very well represented in music until his time. Of course, everyone has probably their own opinions, but his is probably the most powerful. So that's the first piece by Ravel, Ondine. The second following the Ondine is called Les oiseaux tristes, another French word, the sad bird. That's the sad bird. And this has a narrative as well, although it's more a story that comes from a friend of Ravel who wrote in a biography saying that he took a walk, a short walk with Ravel in a very cold forest, but he heard this wonderful sound of a bird. And then suddenly Ravel took his note and wrote down the way he perceived the song, the tune. And he called it arabesque, meaning that bird had a very arabesque sound. Probably one would interpret it more like an oriental sound. And that was a very interesting idea that he puts into a big context of a forest that was cold and dark, which actually implied the fact that it was very spooky and dangerous and had a very weird feeling, having this beauty uh, hidden into a dark forest. So basically, I think we can summarize it as there is beauty in everything, and that's what he's trying to do there. On the other hand, this following idea is that the music in this piece has a strong symbol which is commonly known across a lot of composers, especially in Impressionist era, the symbol of a bell. And you will hear that in the opening of the piece. That symbol itself represents the ringing of a bell, and then that connects to the piece that follows Ravel by George Enescu, which is titled Carillon Nocturne, which means bells. George Enescu is a Romanian composer, so I really find a lot of music heritage into his compositions, and I filter it through my own understanding. But this connects two composers of different nationalities, but with similar ideas in mind. So he takes the bell symbol and he tries to show it from a different angle, and the difference into between the Ravel's interpretation of a bell and Enescu's bell sound is that Ravel thought of it more like a suggestion, and Enescu thought more of an effect, because he's not focused on the bell itself, he's actually focused on the overtones. And very few pay attention to that. Only people who live in cities or towns with a lot of bells that ring them at the same time. And that seemed to be the case when Enescu composed it. He was in Paris, and around noon, all the bells in the city would start ringing. And what I think he mentioned in one of his books, if I don't step too far away from this topic, he called it a symphony of bells, the noon o'clock ring. And that's where he came up with this idea that the bells have a lot of overtones. And you will hear how strange it feels, but at the same time surreal and very close to reality at the same time. So I'll stop right here with a brief explanation. Please feel free to upload anytime. I just wanted to give you a narrative. Hopefully this gets reflected in my playing as well. So I hope you will enjoy this. The next two short pieces are by Sergei Bortkiewicz, less known composer who lived during the same time as the great romantics. He is Ukrainian, and he became more popular probably in the last decade or so, especially around the news that brought up a lot of political turmoil. But nevertheless, the music he wrote is very, very powerful, and Esquisse de Crimée is a suite of short pieces that ultimately describes his impressions through music language about Crimea Island. He visited Crimea Island for the first time, and he was fascinated by the rich cultures that came from both geographical sides, west and east. So he compiled these impressions, and the two pieces I chose to play are very different, because the first one, Idylle Orientale, is basically showing the Oriental side, more Middle Eastern, if I can represent it this way, influences. Whereas the last one is pure passion and dramatic storm, which probably described his reactions and feelings to wars that were taking place even back then, 100 years ago. Because the moment where he visited the island, exactly I'm not sure the date, but I can for sure guarantee the fact that this happened sometimes at the beginning of 1900s. Maybe 1909, 1908 is when he went there, and he was fascinated by the cultures in Crimea Island. So the last one, which is called Chaos, is self-explanatory. transition because I promised it. 5 minutes, if everyone can bear with me, and I'll be back. if the first part of the program, uh, I intended it more reflective and uh, mystic, the second definitely the opposite. So I hope this is more dynamic and more playful, maybe with one exception. The list piece from Anne de Pèlerinage, the first book, Les Cloches de Genève, that is probably the exception. I would like to play that at the end, with your permission. So I want to start with Carmen Petra Basacopoulos and her suite titled Impressions from the Village Museum. This is an English translation from the original title, which is in Romanian. She is a wonderful composer. As you can tell, she died recently. That's 2 years ago. I had the pleasure of speaking with her maybe right at the end of her career before she died, and I was actually interested in her piece for a long time, and finally got the time to learn it. And then I had questions, as anyone does, especially when we hear that the composer is still alive, and I was surprised, and that was in 2022. So I called her and I asked about the pieces, and in the end, all I can say is that everyone who plays these pieces thinks of Romania and the source of inspiration, which is the village museum, as you can tell in the title, which is an outdoor museum in Bucharest, the capital of Romania. The interesting things about this museum are the different artifacts, architecture, buildings, and a lot of ornaments that are brought from different corners of the country just to display it outdoors for people in the capital to experience the differences in cultures within the same country. As everyone probably knows, one country doesn't mean one really culture. Sure, we make our own culture, but at the end of the day, all these influences come from somewhere else. And maybe through the filter of our nation as Romanians, we try and make it our own. So, to briefly summarize the influences that inspired the composer, Romania can be divided into at least four main regions. So north, south, east, west, of course. They all have names. There is also one in the center, so that would be the fifth. But everyone heard of Transylvania, for example. Well, it's more known for Dracula than other things, but this is one region which has its own influences coming from Austro-Hungarian Empire. So there is a lot of influences from the west. Then there is the eastern region, which is called, trying to figure out the translation. We'll keep it short. East, where usually the influences come from the Middle East, so from Ottoman Empire and maybe Saudi Arabia, or as far as you can think, because that eastern region has access to the sea, and a lot of influences in the even 101st century come from Ottoman Empire. So you will hear a different type of music elements. And west, again, I mentioned that's another region which is called Ardeal. A lot of people there speak Hungarian as well. And north, which is called Maramuresh, and that's another region that's again closer to Ukraine, for example. So there is south as well, where I come from. It's less, maybe less fun than the others, but right now all the let's say businesses are focused in that area. In any case, every region has its strengths and let's say fingerprints coming from history, and this is what the whole suite is about. It has 6 pieces. The dragons carved on the gate is actually one gate that stands at the entrance of this whole museum and has dragons carved, which is not very common in our culture. So we tend to think of maybe Asian culture having dragons, not Romania. That was her instinct as well. Was probably shocked, and she really liked it. And the first piece is quite wild. At the same time, the hut, the second piece, it's actually an old rural house in the villages of Romania, which, if I can describe it simply, would be made of hay. The roof was very simple, very cold, and very primitive. And the fun thing about this piece is that inside it's very cold. It sounds grotesque. It sounds scary. You can almost hear the floor cracking while you're walking in the dark. So the third, the spire of the church, it's just one of those elements that's common in most of the churches throughout Romania. I have to probably add the fact that Romania is mostly Orthodox, majority is Orthodox, so churches have a very particular way of looking, and the spire is usually the one that is at the top of a tower, and it's very emblematic in a way. All churches have this. So the next one, the Game of the Flames. Now this is mostly inspired about again houses in rural Romania which have chimneys and fireplaces, and back in those days, maybe 1800s, didn't have electricity, and probably even nowadays some of them in the mountains especially, they rely on wood, and that's maybe her impression of fire being a very playful element. And then the next one, the fountain, again self-explanatory, but a lot of churches once again have fountains where people in Romania usually, it's a custom, they drop coins as a sign of luck and praying. And the last one, the mask from Nereju, Nereju being a region somewhere in Romania. It's basically a ritual. Again, in the rural parts of Romania, a lot of villagers would celebrate different holidays with outfits like this and dances. And most of the dances, maybe more in the beginning of 19th century, 20th century, not so much nowadays, unfortunately, would have a lot of rituals. You use masks and dances that are very primitive and wild. In a way, it reminds the musicians, at least, of the rituals from Sacre de Printemps by Stravinsky. And I'm not bringing up randomly, but he is one of the composers that inspired her as well. So you will hear a lot of elements from Stravinsky, perhaps Ravel, and her own folk interpretation of different rural villages in the country. So it's about 15 minutes long, and I hope you will enjoy it. The next Romanian pieces are by Paul Constantinescu, uh, another composer who lived in the 20th century, more popular than Carmen Petra Basacopol, but with a similar style, if I can say that, because both of them loved the countryside and folk tunes. And Paul Constantinescu had a similar approach for the three pieces for piano, which is a very simple title for this suite. But he composed three beautiful pieces that are inspired by folk tunes from different regions. And the very first one, the original title is Joc, which in translation means a dance, a playful dance. The second one is Cântec, which is a lullaby. It's just a song. And the last one is called Joc Dobrogean, which is also another type of dance from a different region, Dobrogea. Again, that's the region I mentioned earlier, being part of the eastern Romania. And to give an idea about each dance, the first one comes from the center region, Transylvania, which is a mixed dance that combines 3+2 meters. So you will often hear this 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, or 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. The second one, the lullaby, is a very lyrical song that comes from the southern region, that's where I'm from, which is known as Muntenia. It's basically a theme with variations. And the last one, which probably is more popular than the other two, because a lot of Romanian pianists choose to play only that, that comes from the eastern part, again, Dobrogea, where in some festivities, if I can put it mildly, they play music that's intended to be danceable and fun and very fast. And they have this particular instrument that checks all the boxes, which is known as dulcimer. It's a percussive instrument with strings. And the instrumentalist usually uses sticks. So very, very interesting. I'm not sure if you've seen it. It's very common, especially in weddings. So you see probably a lot of, if you go online and try to research this dulcimer, it's țambal in our language, but it's a very interesting instrument, and I think it has its origins somewhere from the east. Maybe the Ottoman Empire was the source, or even Persia. It's not known yet. But the idea is that this last piece is a toccata. It's a very fast and repetitive, rhythmically strong, driven piece. And it's meant to replicate that instrument. A lot of the people who play, they like to show off. They strike the strings over the sticks over the whole range of the strings, and then it's basically the soul of the party, to put it mildly. Yes. It's called the hammered dulcimer here. Okay, that's the one. Yes. So it's very, very fun to watch. Well, that was his idea, to play a piece on the piano that kind of brings dulcimer to life. So I hope I'm doing it justice. But after that, I'm going to continue with the Scherzo 3 by Chopin, which I think doesn't need an introduction, but it's another very powerful and rhythmically driven piece. So I hope you will enjoy both. finish with the Liszt piece because I began with one and I felt it's appropriate to end with this one. It's another perspective on bells, but a romantic one. So, Les Cloches de Genève, or Genève. Again, the bells of Genève. Everyone probably can translate it a little bit. It's very similar to Ravel's Les Oiseaux Tristes, who had a few bells in the music inserted, and same with Georgianescu's Carillon Nocturne, but this time it's Liszt who interprets these beautiful bells in a different way. So I really hope you enjoy it. I recently learned it and I felt it's so beautiful that I wanted to share it with the world. So I hope you will really like it. thank you very much for coming on a Sunday, and I hope you really enjoyed this program. And if you didn't know about Romanian music, hopefully this is opening your taste. Have a good Sunday.
I looked it up. Is it more there?